الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبع هداه. So today inshallah I just have a couple of videos regarding مخارج الحروف, and because the time is short, we'll leave the second half to reading the assignment, which was supposed to be Surah An-Naba, ayah number 17 to 26, right? And the next week we'll continue or next week we'll have the quiz, and if there is time we'll continue with Makharij al-Huruf, and the following week also we'll continue with Makharij al-Huruf, right? So the first video I wanted to show you is a video that I don't know if some of you have seen it before, but it shows you how important is pronouncing the right words, or how important is having the right pronunciation or point of articulations, like we call them Makharij al-Huruf in the Arabic language. And when a person does not pronounce the word properly, right, it may lead to a different meaning. Maybe, Brother Mustafa, if you can turn off the light at the front. Jazakallah khair. All right, it's better? All right.
Ist ein Waldsektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das gilt das Überlebensradar. Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Did you get the point, everyone? You got the point? Did you see it before? Anybody? You saw it before? All right. This is one of my favorite ones. And the idea is that this guy who is obviously in training, right, in the Coast Guard, the German Coast Guard, have a problem pronouncing this word, right? Yeah, it's good. Yeah. So the word thinking, I sometimes give this as an example. The word thinking, which is the th, which starts with the th. If a person has a problem with this word or with this letter, which is in the Arabic language is the tha, with the three dots, right? Maybe I should put it on the board. Similar to this, the letter tha. Right, so it's the th, like in the word thinking. So we'll, inshallah, if not today, we'll give an example from the Quran of words that change meanings if a person mispronounce a letter, right? And what happens when the person changed the letter from one letter to another. So in this case, it was crucial for the person to understand that they are thinking, right? So that they get help. Now, if you remember at the beginning of this course, I mentioned that we have to be able to listen to recordings that are reliable, right? And we mentioned Sheikh Al-Manshawi, and I gave you the links at the end of the course description. Sheikh Al-Husari, right? Some of you have been listening to those recordings, Sheikh Abdul Basit. And those people obviously died, some of them a long time ago, some of them recently, maybe 20 years ago. And before we continue with this Makharij al-Huruf, I have a video of the biography of Sheikh Mahmoud al-Husari. It's a video that I stumbled upon when I was trying to find a video of the recitation of Sheikh Mahmoud al-Husari on YouTube. The lecture, I don't know the lecturer personally. It's probably somewhere in the States. He seemed to be knowledgeable about the life of this reciter, the famous reciter of the Quran. So if you are patient enough, I understand that we could have watched the video at home, comfortably sitting on the couch. But the idea is that to discuss what we learned from the video, right? So the picture, if you haven't seen the picture of Sheikh Mahmoud al-Husari, that's the photo. He died in the 80s, I think, at the beginning of the 80s, 1980. And this is the video, inshallah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawala amma ba'd. Today we're talking about personality from actually last month's calendar. We didn't have a chance to talk about him, and we're going to continue with him. He's the great reciter and Sheikh Mahmoud Khalil al-Husari. And he's a great individual and someone we need to know about. The difficulty of talking, or the challenge of talking about his life, rahimahullah ta'ala, is that everyone who's talked about thus far is from the previous generations, from 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. When you talk about someone who's so contemporary to our times, and he passed away in 1980, so he's from our grandparents or our father's generation, for those who are my age. The difficulty of talking about someone who's contemporary is that, as the saying goes, the verdict is still out. We don't know the true position of such a person until one or two generations pass. It takes about one or two generations after a person passes away, someone who's renowned, who did something with his life, to really see the effects of what he did. So it's kind of difficult to talk about someone who many of us saw. And there are people in this room, father of Rami, our brother here, he met him a number of times, and he prayed behind him. So there are people who saw him. He passed away in 1980, which is not that far back. But having said that, at the same time, we need to understand that he has a very special status in the history of our ummah, which really no one shares with him. It's a very distinct and unique status. He is, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many, many people, and I think very few people would disagree, he's the undisputed voice of the Quran, Sawtul Quran. His voice is the voice of the Quran. He is the first one in our history, in the history of this ummah, to record the entire Quran with his voice. And he's someone who did it with precision and mastery, such that all the experts of the world, they testify and they bear witness to his expertise. And almost everyone, all scholars of recitation recommend his voice to listen to in order to protect, in order to preserve or enhance your tajweed. So he has a very unique position. To really understand his position, you have to understand the narrative of the preservation of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He promises that He's going to preserve the Quran for us. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We all know that Allah says that the guarantee of the preservation of the Quran is from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Quran is not going to be altered until the end of time. But what very few people realize is that, how did Allah do that? He did that through choosing certain individuals and personalities to the service of the Quran and to preserve it. So Allah did that, or He assured that preservation to human beings, through human beings. So the story of the preservation of the Quran and the story of serving the Quran is a long story. But it is a story that begins with the companions. So, the Prophet ﷺ, he taught the Quran to many companions, and they taught it to their generations after them. So among the companions, for instance, the people who outdid themselves and distinguished themselves over others were a number of people. Not every companion was the same. Some companions were more well-versed in fiqh or ahkam or rules of inheritance. And other companions, they were more well-versed in the Quran. So the Prophet, ﷺ, he concentrated a number of companions and he really took great care to teach them the Quran. For instance, among them is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Among them Ubay ibn Ka'b. Among them Uthman radiallahu anhu. Among them Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. Among them Salim Mawla Abi Hudayfa. There's a hadith that's in Bukhari and Muslim, and it's a hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr, very interesting, that shows us the status of some of the companions. Masruq, one of the tabi'een, he went to, and he said, Kunna na'ti Abdullah ibn Amr. We went to visit Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, the companion radiallahu anhu. And he said, فَذَكَرْنَا يَوْمًا عَبْدَ اللَّهِ ibn Mas'ud فَقَالَ. And we were talking about some issues, and this is later times, and in the presence of Abdullah ibn Amr, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was mentioned. And he said, لَقَدْ ذَكَرْتُمْ رَجُلًا لَا أَزَالُ أُحِبُّهُ بعد شيء سمعته من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Abdullah ibn Amr, he said, this man you just mentioned, I never stopped loving him. And I always think about him and love him since I heard the Prophet ﷺ, something from him. And they asked him, what did you hear from him? He said, لَقَدْ سَمِعْتُ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَقُولُ. The Prophet, he said, خُذُوا الْقُرْآنَ مِنْ أَرْبَعٍ. He said to the companions, take the Quran from 4 people. So he advised his companions, take the Quran from 4 people. And he said, مِنْ إِبْنِ أُمِّ عَبْدٍ فَبَدَأَ بِهِ. And the first one he mentioned, Ibn Abd, is the title of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. It's the laqab, or the title that he was referred to. So the Prophet, he told the companions, take the Quran from 4 people. Yani learn the Quran and really sit down with 4 companions. First one, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And then he said, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, wa Ubay ibn Ka'b, wa Salim Mawla Abi Hudayfa, radiyallahu anhum ajma'een. So the story of the preservation of the Quran, it begins with these companions, some of them who excelled others, and it continues with the compilation of the Mus'haf. So the most important stage in the early times was the compiling of the Mus'haf. The work began with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, who was the first one who brought all the pages that the people wrote the Quran in one place, and he left it with one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And the work was really completed by Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, who commissioned a committee of people, and he had one standard Quran, transcribed in written form using a standard script. And he united the Ummah on that script. He made copies and sent them to different cities of the Muslim world. So such that all the Qurans today, from that time until our time, until the end of time, will be written by the rasm of Uthman radiallahu anhu, the orthography of Uthman. That story of the preservation continued over the ages with the 10 Imams of recitation. So over the different regions of the Muslim world, 10 great Imams distinguished themselves as the great teachers of their regions. And the qira'at, or the readings of the Quran, the Quran was revealed in various ways. And all of them from the Prophet ﷺ, 10 people really taught those. And the names of the qira'at go back to these 10 Imams. And then the documentation of those readings continue with great individuals like Ibn Mujahid, Ad-Dani, and Ash-Shatibi, and it was consummated by Ibn al-Jazari, rahimahullah ta'ala. And then the work of the preservation of the Quran also continued from the perspective of explaining what the Quran is. It's not enough just to read the Quran, we have to understand what it is, what it means. So these are the great scholars of tafsir. They began with the tabi'een, who started documenting from the companions the views of what the verses meant. And the great mufassirin that have the greatest role in our ummah are people like Al-Tabari from the earliest times, people like Ibn Kathir, people like Al-Qurtubi. And then in every age, Allah blessed some individuals to stand up and rewrite the tafsir in the language of the times. So every age has mufassirin. So this is part of the preservation of the Quran. This story continues to Shaykh al-Husari. How? Shaykh al-Husari, the first one who recorded the entire Quran with his voice. The first one in our history that the entire Quran was recorded with precision in a way that everyone attested to that this is perfect. And it was never done before. What are the reasons for that? Obviously, the rise of technology. Before, it was the era of teaching, there was no recording devices. But actually, there were some recordings earlier that Imam al-Husari, the oldest recording that I've come across is from 1885. It's in the National Geographic, also on CNN. There was a traveler who wasn't Muslim who pretended to be Muslim, and he made the Hajj. And he went there in order to take pictures and to document, as a cultural traveler used to do in those times. So this person, he took some pictures, and he had a primitive device of recording, audio recording. It wasn't a cassette or a CD, it was much before that time. So there's a surah that's available on YouTube, Surah Al-Duha, that's recorded from 1885. So almost more than 150 years ago, about a century and a half ago. But the entire Quran was never recorded from beginning to end in a professional way until Al-Husari took up this task. So he is the voice of the Quran, and when the history is written and the dust settles, we will see his maqam, his role as the Sawtul Quran, and all the recordings subsequently will be taking his pioneering work as a model. So who was Shaykh al-Husari, Mahmud Khalil al-Husari rahimahullah ta'ala? A brief look at his life. He was born in 1917. 1917 corresponding to 1335 of the Hijri calendar. He was born in Egypt in a village, Shibr al-Namla, in the center of the province of Tanta. His journey in Quran began at a very early age. His father, at the age of 4, now you can imagine, at the age of 4, his father sat him down with the Kuttab, which is the Quranic reciters, the Quranic teachers of his time. So in the masjid they used to have the Kuttab that the Quranic teachers would teach the children. And they were called Kuttab because they would write the Quran on these slabs, on these slates. And that's how they would learn the Quran. So Shaykh al-Husari began studying with these scribes at the age of 4. And he began memorizing and writing the Quran according to that methodology. And he finished memorizing the Quran by the age of 8. So he was 8 years old when he finished the Quran. His father was a very pious person. He wanted to advance his studies, and he actually wanted him to enroll in the Quranic schools, the institutes that were in that region. But the problem was every institute had the minimum age of admission was 12 years old. So here Shaykh al-Husari's finished the Quran at the age of 8. He has 4 years left, and his father was looking for him to advance his studies. So unfortunately he couldn't enter those schools. But he began studying Tajweed. He began studying the Quran and perfecting his recitation at that age with some of the sheikhs of that area. So although he wasn't able to enter the institutes or the colleges, at least he continued his studies. So he would go, according to his biographers, his sons who wrote his biography and others, that his father used to take him after Salatul Asr to his local masjid, and he would recite Quran there with the sheikhs, and sometimes he would just recite. And at that young age, people started listening to him. And people started noticing that this was a child who was special, he had a voice. And people began coming and inviting him. They started inviting him to their parties, to their weddings, and to the different gatherings at night for him to recite the Quran. And he's only like 10 years old, in the early teens. So he began to become well known in his village. And his voice began to mature. So when he reached the age of 12, he was already semi-famous. And at that time, then he enrolled in the institute. So he enrolled in the local institute in Tanta, which was affiliated with Azhar University. And then he, attained his secondary education. And then he went on and pursued the 10 readings. So he learned all the qira'at, the 10 readings of the Quran. And during this whole time, he was semi-famous, so he continued visiting people. People would invite him to the funerals, to the janazas, to the wedding, for him to recite the Quran. And during this time, there are many stories. The shuyukh of the time, like Shaykh al-Khafar, used to invite him to his house and just to recite the Quran. So he was invited a lot, and he generally went everywhere he was invited to recite Quran. And people praised him, and some of the shuyukh, they encouraged him to continue his service of the Quran. A word about his family life. He was married in 1938. And there's a saying, behind every great man is a great woman. And without a doubt, his family life, it was his wife that really allowed him to do everything that he did. And when we look at some of the accomplishments and some of the things that he did that very few other people were able to do in his time, his wife was very cooperative. She was very pious, and she basically took care of the kids. So Shaykh al-Husari, he was a wide traveler. He was always out. He was meeting the dignitaries of his time. Jamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, he was close to him. He went to some of the greatest places in the world. He recited in the United Nations, in the White House. He recited in Buckingham Palace. So he traveled the world as an ambassador of the Quran. He was an imam in many, many masajid. He was a mu'adhin. He was a member on many religious institutes. But all this time, he didn't have a lot of time for his family. So the family was very supportive. So his wife basically took care of the affairs at home. She was responsible for the upbringing of the children. He didn't have a whole lot of time. But this was all with cooperation. She didn't complain about it. There's no evidence that, and his children write his biography, that they loved him. They never felt that there wasn't enough time on behalf of their father. And one of the things about him is that he was a very loving father, and he really wanted all his children to memorize the Quran. He had a number of children, sons and daughters, and he would always encourage them. And every time they would come to him to ask him for anything, any money or any gift or anything like that, he would first ask them, what did you memorize today? And if they memorized something, he would give them. So he basically, in his household, he developed this environment. And alhamdulillah, every single one of his children memorized the Quran, including the daughters. So all of his children are complete huffaz. One of his children, only one of his sons followed in his footsteps as an imam and as a reciter. But the rest of them, all of them have contributions. His daughter is responsible, he's the director of one of the schools that he founded. So this is Sheikh al-Husri in his home life. In 1944, his debut in Egypt, basically. Right now, up until this time, he's very famous in his village, and he's reciting in Tanta and all these regions. But he participated in a competition on the radio. So this is the era of radio, and radio was very popular. So in 1944, November 16th, he recited in a competition, and he was declared #1. And after that, the radio started inviting him, and then Egypt began to know him. So he became a regular voice on Egyptian radio for the next couple of decades from that time. So he became very famous beyond his region. And then in 1948, shortly after that, he was appointed, his first official position was a mu'adhin of Masjid Sayyidi Hamza in Tanta. So he became the mu'adhin. Shortly after, just a few months after that, he became the imam and a reciter. And then he shifted to a number of masajid, becoming imam and reciter in a variety of masajid until he settled in Cairo in 1955, the capital of Egypt. And there he continued serving different masajid and communities, and that's where he passed away. So in addition to his service in the masajid, Wazirat al-Awqaf, the Ministry of Endowments, and Azhar University has a number of religious institutions that he was made director of. So among those, Lajna, Tashrif al-Masahib, the committee of producing the Masahib, the written copies of the Quran. So the story of his recording of the Quran, that was his greatest contribution. That happened in 1961. What's the story behind that? Sheikh al-Husri was very far-sighted. At that time, there were a lot of missionary activity in Africa. So Christian missionaries and churches were going in Africa and educating people and trying to spread all this information. And among the things they were using is spreading distorted views about the Quran. So the fact that the Quran is altered and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of confusion that was arising in his time. Sheikh al-Husri, in all his committees and his positions, he raised this issue that we need to have a Quran that is recorded in voice, because this is the era of media now. So he was far ahead of his time, and he was thinking ahead. And this idea was presented to different committees, and a number of people, a number of shuyukh were proposed to be the ones to recite the Quran. So, this project was presented to a number of people. Now, Allah wills something and we will other things, so what happened was there were disputes, mainly about compensation. So every person they went to, something happened, he couldn't do it, or there was some argument about compensation, how much money they were going to get, until finally the matter rested in Sheikh al-Husri, and he did it without any compensation. So he recorded the entire Quran in a professional way in the studio in 1961. And he did it with the riwayat Hafs. And after that it was presented to many, many sheikhs, many, many experts, and all of them, they looked it over, and before they produced it and they publicized it, they had it checked and edited by many, many individuals, and everyone testified that this is precise. So eventually this became the official recitation of the Quran. Now, because of that service, a lot of people recognize that Jamal Abdel Nasser was the president of Egypt. 1967, he awarded him the Medal of Arts and Sciences because of his recording of the Quran. He went on to record in 1964 the entire Quran with the Riwayat Warsh. So in another reading, we have it, it's still available online. And he went on to record also Qalun and Ad-Duri. So there are 4 riwayat, Al-Hafs, Warsh, Qalun and Duri. All these 4 riwayat we have the entire Quran in a professional recording from the voice of Shaykh al-Husari. Not only that, he was the first one to record the Quran as Mu'allim form. So now when we go on Islam Way and Islam Web and we download recordings, there's something called Mushaf Mu'allim, which is basically a recording of the Quran for teaching purposes. So where the Shaykh recites, and then he pauses, gives you a gap for you to recite the verse after him. And sometimes you hear children reciting, sometimes you don't. So Shaykh al-Husari is the one who did that. And now all the different Qur'an, many of the reciters, they follow that model. He also was the first to record the Quran in Mujawwad. Mujawwad is a little slightly different style of recitation where you recite in a slower way rather than a faster pace and with focus on the rules. So these are all the masahif that are recorded by voice by Shaykh al-Husari. Not only was he a reciter, he also wrote a number of books. So that's what's unique about him compared to other qurra or reciters. He wrote a number of books on qira'at and on Quranic sciences. Among his books, and I have this particular one, Ahkam Qira'at al-Quran al-Kareem, a book on Tajweed that's 300 to 400 pages on the rules of Tajweed. And the style of writing of Shaykh al-Husari is very simple, it's very easy to follow, it's written for the layman. So he wrote that, he wrote Al-Qira'at al-Ashr min Shatibiyyah wa Durra, the 10 readings from Shatibiyyah and Durra. He wrote Al-Fath al-Kabir fil Isti'adati wa Takbir, a rule, a book, an entire book, it's not that big, about the rules of Bismillah and A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, how you begin with that. And he wrote about a dozen works. So this is very unique about him. Not only was he a reciter, but he also was an author, and he authored a number of beneficial works. Another distinction about him, and we kind of alluded to that, he's one of the first qurra to start traveling the world. So usually you have scholars and imams, they teach in their areas, in their regions, and most of them go to the capital of their city or the capital of their country. But Shaykh al-Husari was the first one to start traveling around the world. So one of his first visits was to India. And he traveled as an ambassador of the Quran. His position was a qari. Everywhere he went, he wanted to recite and to increase the love of Quran in people. So he traveled to India and in Pakistan in 1960. There's a funny story about him when he arrived in India in 1960. Basically, the Egyptian authority, they arranged his visit ahead of the visit of Gamal Abdul Nasser to India. So they wanted to send Husari first in order to, just get people accustomed to Egyptians, and then the president would come later. So when he arrived in Bombay, in the airport, something happened with the arrangement. There was no one there to pick him up. So he was in Bombay, the first time he ever traveled outside of the country, and the first time he's in India, and he's wearing his dress, and he has no idea what to do. He was very confused, and he was very scared. So eventually what happened is he went outside, and he happened to find a taxi, and he sat in the taxi. And he tried to talk to the person, they speak Hindi there, and he doesn't speak English either. So basically for hours they were riding around the streets of Bombay in India, and he's trying to explain to him where he is, where he wants to go, and eventually what happened is, and everywhere he's going, he says that people were staring at him. He was wearing his turban, and he was wearing his typical Azhari clothes, and like he usually wears a scarf, kind of like this one. So eventually they dropped him off in a hotel, and in the hotel with sign language, he kind of, they kind of realized he's from Egypt. They called the Egyptian embassy, and then the Egyptian embassy found out he was there, and they came and they rescued him. So after that, he promised, and he actually swore that he would never go anywhere until whoever's going to pick him up is going to call him and tell him that, I'm going to be there, and everything's arranged in advance. And when he used to tell that story, he would laugh. He was very good about it, very pleasant about it. So he traveled to India, to Pakistan. He went to Kuwait in 1963. He went to France. Not only traveled the Muslim world, but among his distinctions was he traveled the non-Muslim, the Western world as well. He visited France in 1965, and it is said that 10 people embraced Islam after hearing his recitation. He visited the United States in 1973, and on a number of occasions. 1973 is one of the occasions, and it's written that a number of people embraced Islam after visiting him and hearing his recitation. He was one of the first people, or he's the first person to ever recite the Quran in the United States Congress. Now that's written in his biographies. I'm still trying to corroborate that. I mean, this is a fascinating topic for research, for historical interest. Someone can look up the annals of the archives of Congress because they record these things. So as a dignitary, he actually recited in the Congress. He's the first person to recite the Quran in the United Nations. He did that in 1977. He visited Buckingham Palace, where he also, I think there he gave the adhan, or he recited the Quran. So everywhere he went, he was the voice of the Quran. He was the ambassador of the Quran. So Shaykh al-Husri was a great individual. This is his status. Towards the end of his life, he passed away in 1980. So, most people kind of know what happened, that their time is near. So about a year before he passed away, he started doing some things, according to his children, that seemed like he kind of knew. So he started increasing his charitable works. So he started building masajid. He built an institute of Quran and a college. And he started doing a lot of these things. In one of his visits in that year to Saudi Arabia, he got very ill. He started suffering from heart failure. So at that time, the doctors advised him to check himself into a hospital. He refused to take medicine. He came back and then he took medicine periodically, and eventually they thought he was okay, and then he came home and he passed away in 1980 after praying Isha prayer on November 24th, 1980. And after he passed away, a lot of things were learned about him. Among the things, is his charitable efforts. All the Qur'an of his time, generally this was their profession, and they would take a lot of money for their services. Shaykh al-Husri was never known to demand any type of compensation. So people would give him things, but it's nothing that he demanded on his own. He recorded the Quran as a service, fi sabilillah. And every book that he wrote, even all the books, the dozens of books that he wrote, he didn't do it for money. And every book that he wrote, he gave it to the ministries of that time, and to Azhar University, for instance, and he told them to distribute them. And they would distribute them at very low cost, and that would make him very happy. And in his will, he wrote that 1/3 of his entire wealth would be given away in charity. So, when he passed away, according to his sons, there were 2 masajid that he built that were nearing completion, and he was trying to finish them very quickly. But unfortunately, he passed away before that. So that was Sheikh Mahmoud Khalil al-Husri. There are so many things that can be said about him. And there are so many things we're going to learn in the future, because he's someone who passed away very recently. But some of the lessons from his life there's so many lessons, but some of them is his devotion to perfection, ihsan. Too many of us, we settle for mediocrity. We just want to finish the Quran, memorize the Quran, and be a hafiz, that's it, and be an imam. We don't have high aspirations. Shaykh al-Husri recites Quran unlike anyone else. Now, he's not among the popular reciters. Unfortunately, when you go to the children who are memorizing Quran, you find them imitating other reciters and this reciter. Very rarely do you find a child memorizing or trying to imitate Shaykh al-Husri, because he's not those popular reciters, but he's someone who's an expert, who's mahir, who's someone who's testified by entire, and every person I studied with respect to Tajweed, and I've never seen any expert of Tajweed advise anything other than that. Everyone advises, listen to Shaykh al-Husri. That's like the near unanimous consensus of scholars of Quran. So his devotion to the Quran is legendary, his charitable efforts, and in the end, all we can say is, the words of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, Al-mahiru bil-Quran ma'a safaratil kiram al-bara. The expert of the Quran is with the noble company of the angels. And when you think about that description, there's no one in our time that fits that description more than Shaykh Mahmoud Khalil al-Husri, al-Mahir, the expert of the Quran. And inshallah, he's with the noble angels right now. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower His mercy upon him and to allow us to follow in the footsteps of him and all similar individuals. Wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in.
Jazakumullah khair. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. It was kind of long, so we will not do anything else today other than the reading. But how is this related, do you think, to Makharij al-Huruf? Or was there something interesting that you learned from this video? Yes, tell them so.
I didn't know the biography of the Sheikh Hussein.
You didn't?
I didn't know like these details.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was interesting to know that he was the first person to record the whole Quran,
Yeah.
and it was approved
Mm-hmm.
by the scholars of Tajweed of his time.
Mm-hmm. On one hand, it was approved probably later on, but the idea at the beginning, a lot of people at the time were freaked out by this idea, and they thought it was like a bid'ah to record the whole Quran on audio, right? But obviously, it was approved later on, and of course, there's probably a lot more details about his life. This is probably one of the best summaries of his life in English that I could find on the internet. The rest is in Arabic, obviously, maybe lengthy details about his life. And like the Sheikh here said, that those people have been selected. It is not an accident that these people, they were basically carrying the responsibility of the Quran to the next generation. And I don't think that we will see another person having this privilege in the future, right? I mean, even if somebody comes today and say, okay, I'm going to do a video instead of an audio, right? Still, these people, the difference between these people and the people that will come later on is that these people are closer to the source. I'm sure you agree with me. The closer to the source, the better. And even when you, for those who who have a chain of qira'at, who are connected to the Prophet ﷺ, the shorter the chain, the better, right? The shorter the chain, the better. The less people you have between yourself and the Prophet ﷺ, the better. You are closer to the source. So the farther away from the source, the more distortion or possibility of distortion you can have, right? There's more possibility of distortion. So those people, they are basically extinct basically today, and they are very few, right? Most of those popular reciters, popular in terms of knowledge, they've already passed away. I mean, there's very few that are still alive today. So how is this connected to the topic? I mean, it is connected in a way that you have to learn the proper pronunciation from the source, right? And the source is these kind of people, these kind of recordings. As the Sheikh mentioned, today people don't know about what is the difference between Hussein, between Sudais or whoever, the modern reciters. I mean, there's a big difference, right? It's like if you want to learn authentic knowledge, you go to the source. If you want to learn about, if you want to become a doctor, you go to medical school, right? You don't go to the internet or to YouTube videos, right? It's pretty obvious. You go to the source. So this is how it is related with the topic. Inshallah, next week we will have the quiz at the beginning of the session, and then we'll continue with some aspect of مخارج الحروف, inshallah. All right. Any comments or nothing? All right. Let's read then the portion that we were supposed to read, which is Surah An-Naba, ayah number 17 to 26. Surah An-Naba, ayah 17 to 26. All right, brother.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
جزاك الله خير. Brother Ahmed.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا.
The meme of Yawma is soft, Brother Ahmed. It's always soft, the meme.
إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا
بردا ولا
لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما
حميما again it's the same thing.
إلا حميما وغساقا.
What is this rule called here? حميما
That's إدغام.
إدغام? Or do you agree with him? Brother Hanif says incomplete. Which is a good sign. I mean, that means it's not wrong, but just incomplete. Brother Hanif, you want to help him out? It is idgham bi ghunna, with the ghunna. And that's why we say حميما
إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
Again here.
جزاء وفاقا.
That's better. Jazakallah khair. Brother Hanif.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
جزاك الله خير Brother Hanif. Brother Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
جزاك الله خير Brother Mustafa.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
جزاك الله خير. Brother Sajjad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا.
What kind, in the word miqata, what kind of rules do we have, Brother Sajjad?
We have we're supposed to elongate me because it's yaful like like a mud, and then there's also another one on qaf to elongate that, and then there's also the alif after the ta, so you should also elongate that.
Are they all the same?
I don't quite remember the names.
Yeah, but are they all the same in terms of length?
I think so, yes.
How long?
2 harakat.
All right. Do you agree with him, brothers? He missed one rule, yes. Or it's yes, it's incomplete. So if you stop, then it is a mad tabi'i, right? It's 2 haraka. But if you continue, then we have tanween followed by ya, right? All right. So the issue is that the mad tabi'i you were not making it long enough.
Should I start from now?
Repeat from inna yawm al-fasli.
إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا.
See, now we went back to too short.
يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
جزاك الله خير. Brother Yahya.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا.
All right, maybe next time you read much slower. Still have time. We still have 5 minutes actually. We finished early. All right, let me read it and then we'll conclude inshallah. إن يوم الفصل كان ميقاتا يوم ينفخ في الصور فتأتون أفواجا وفتحت السماء فكانت أبوابا وسيرت الجبال فكانت سرابا إن جهنم كانت مرصادا للطاغين مآبا لابثين فيها أحقابا لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا إلا حميما وغساقا جزاء وفاقا. All right, any questions or comment? Yes, brother Mustafa.
Can you read again لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا؟
لا يذوقون فيها بردا ولا شرابا. All right. I just remembered there was a sheikh who used to come to Vancouver for many years. Sheikh Mustafa, you met him? All right. He has 10 qira'at and he was very knowledgeable about the qira'at. So I insisted that I should read to him. Sometimes it's very hard to get time, like a private time with the sheikh. So I insisted. So the first time I read to him, and before he even asked me, like, who do I listen to, or he said, Sheikh Al-Husari fixed the points of articulations for you. This is what he said. Before he even asked me, like, who do you listen to? And this is what happened when you listen to Sheikh Al-Husari. Not only that you are learning how to pronounce the letters or the words, or where to stop and where to continue from and those kind of things, but it's also about the timing. Like I was asking Brother Sajjad about the timing, to increase it or decrease it. So you are learning the timing. The timing is one of the most difficult things, maybe after the points of articulations, to learn. So the timing, you learn it from the reference, right? No matter what you may read on in the books about the timing, like the 2 haraka and the 4 haraka and 6 haraka, unless you listen to these people, it's very hard to get it right. Right? It's very hard to get it right. All right, so next week we'll have the quiz, and we'll do hopefully either a presentation about Makharij al-Huruf. We'll continue with that, or we'll talk about Makharij al-Huruf, and if there is time we can read something else as well. And next week, or the week after that, we'll continue with Surah Al-Infitar. You have it written in the course description. All right, if there's no questions, we'll stop here, inshallah. Pray Salat al-Isha. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خير.